Captain's log. The Ubisoft meltdown is out of control. For so many AAA video game publishers, 2024 has been nothing short of a catastrophic joke, with absurd amounts of money being flushed away in what can only be described as an epic display of incompetence. Take Concord, for instance. Sony managed to squander a staggering $400 million on this train wreck before they had to sheepishly pull it from store shelves after the public quite predictably rejected the game outright. But let's not pretend Sony is the only clown in this circus. Ubisoft, true to form, has been consistently bungling its way through the year, finding itself neck-deep in controversies that are further eroding whatever's left of its already poor reputation. As a result, their stock has predictably tanked, and now they're desperately trying to salvage trust in an industry that, unsurprisingly, is becoming less and less forgiving of such corporate idiocy. Originally, I thought I'd make a single video covering all the drama and fiascos Ubisoft has been tangled up in this year, but as I started compiling the endless list of their blunders, it became painfully obvious that cramming all of their misadventures into just one video would be an insult to the sheer magnitude of their downfall. So instead, if enough of you hit that subscribe button right now, I might choose to turn this into an entire trilogy. So, with Ubisoft's downright embarrassing situation in mind, join me today as we take a look back at how this disastrous year started for them, and more recently, the release of arguably the most loathed Star Wars video game of all time. From the endless drama surrounding this utterly questionable title to the disgraceful behaviour of their out-of-touch management and staff, there is so much to shake our heads at in shame and continue to laugh at this game. Let's just say there are reasons why every single project churned out under this corporate behemoth ends up creatively bankrupt and completely devoid of anything resembling fun. At this stage, it's almost impossible to muster even a sliver of sympathy for a company that's managed to ignore every piece of constructive criticism thrown its way, no matter how disastrous things have gotten, making this fall from grace feel all the more glorious. So, let's celebrate their failures today. That's right, I'm about to take a dump on Ubisoft, even bigger than the one Amber Heard left on Johnny Depp's bedsheets. So I am Lady Decade and hit that subscribe button. This is why the Star Wars Outlaws controversy is pathetic. Video games. There have been so many completely unappealing ones released recently, hasn't there? But if you can shovel through the excrement, there are fortunately diamonds in the rough. Take the brilliant Space Marines 2, for example, an amazing pick-up-and-play hyper-manly third-person shooter, or how about the amazing Black Myth Wukong, easily a Game of the Year contender. I can get you huge discounts on both these new games as well as thousands of other AAA, indie, retro and modern titles simply by using my affiliate link via the pinned comment. Please support my work and grab some amazing bargains simultaneously today. Happy shopping, but for now, let's bury a certain Western gaming giant. Ubisoft has turned into a complete joke and is consistently making colossal mistakes that severely tarnish its reputation. Once known for delivering groundbreaking franchises like Assassin's Creed and Far Cry, the company seems to be assassinating itself, becoming a far cry of its former self, plagued by lackluster game releases, constant delays and uninspired sequels that feel more like cash grabs than genuine efforts to entertain. You could say they are a shadow of who they once were, but I'd probably cover everything there is to know about that part of this show later this week. One thing is for sure, their over-reliance on bloated open-world formulas, excessive microtransactions, and an inability to listen to fan feedback has left gamers feeling disgusted and disillusioned regarding the Ubisoft brand. And these are some of the less embarrassing issues the company has faced recently, as games like Star Wars Outlaws has people talking about them for all the wrong reasons. Despite multiple opportunities to turn things around, Ubisoft seems stuck in a cycle of poor decision-making time and time again, proving they've lost touch with what made their old games sell well in the past. In fact, Ubisoft's knack for doing stupid shit in 2024 has become so extensive that it's genuinely hard to keep track of all the nonsense they've managed to pull off. But, of course, they wasted no time and are off to a flying start in this category as early as January, as the stupid company were determined to set the bar for incompetence right from the get-go. As part of their predatory push towards convincing consumers to spend out on their god-awful subscription service, in an interview with GameIndustry.biz, Ubisoft Director of Subscriptions Philippe Tremblay would foolishly suggest that gamers need to become more comfortable with not owning their games. Considering how much many gamers value physical media and how little effort publishers put into game preservation, this would rightfully cause outrage. He stated, "One of the things we saw is that gamers are used to, a little bit like DVD, having and owning their games. That's the consumer shift that needs to happen. They got comfortable with not owning their CD collection or DVD collection. That's a transformation that's been a bit slower to happen in games. So it's about feeling comfortable with not owning your game." Naturally, this sparked a predictable wave of criticism online as countless people jumped to the conclusion that Ubisoft's true intention is to strip players of control and trap them in a system where they have absolutely no permanent access to the games they've shelled out their hard-earned money for. It reeked of yet another shameless attempt to squeeze every last penny from the community, treating loyal customers as nothing more than mindless, walking ATMs rather than acknowledging them as passionate enthusiasts who genuinely value the connection and sense of ownership they have with their gaming experiences. Essentially, Ubisoft had made themselves look disgusting. Predictably, not long after this gloriously tone-deaf statement, Ubisoft's share prices took a well-deserved nosedive, with many chalking it up to the company's impeccable talent for saying exactly the wrong thing. But as if on cue, things deteriorated further. Enter the Stop Killing Games campaign, a movement born out of pure exasperation when Ubisoft, in their boundless wisdom, decided to unceremoniously pull the plug on online support for The Crew. Despite selling over 2 million copies, loyal players who had poured their time, energy and money into the game were unceremoniously tossed aside as Ubisoft abruptly cut off access, leaving them with yet another useless product gathering dust. If there was ever any doubt that Ubisoft should be the last name associated with game preservation and digital-only gaming, this stunt erased it completely. And that's not even getting started on their train wrecks of video game projects this year. Ubisoft's recent offerings have been nothing short of a masterclass in mediocrity, riddled with a complete lack of originality, mind-numbingly repetitive gameplay, countless bugs and glitches, and a relentless obsession with squeezing every last penny out of players. It's no wonder that longtime fans who once eagerly anticipated each new release now roll their eyes in exasperation. Instead of evolving or, heaven forbid, actually listening to what players want, Ubisoft stubbornly clings to outdated formulas, churning out uninspired sequels that feel more like obligatory chores than actual adventures. Even worse, they've somehow managed to cater to an imaginary modern audience who, surprise, surprise, doesn't exist, leaving the rest of us with downright embarrassing games. It's astonishing how effectively they've squandered every ounce of goodwill their past successes once earned them. If you've spent even a fraction of time online in 2024, you're already painfully aware that 2 of their games have been lapping up the lion's share of negative attention. One is Assassin's Creed Shadows, which I might just grace with a breakdown later this week if enough of you hit that subscribe button, and the other is the pathetically bad Star Wars Outlaws. Unfortunately though, if you possess even the faintest understanding of the entertainment industry, you'd be all too excruciatingly aware of what a dreadful year it has been for the Star Wars brand. Case in point, the utterly tone-deaf catastrophe that is Star Wars: The Acolyte. which somehow managed to snag the prestigious honour of being the least watched Star Wars series on Disney Plus ever. This horrible show faced well-deserved criticism for its blatant disregard of established Star Wars lore and its heavy-handed attempt to inject modern political agendas into a universe that fans once loved for its timeless escapism. Instead of delivering the thrilling, epic storytelling that made Star Wars iconic, the series came off as a dull, preachy mess with uninspired characters and lackluster plot lines that couldn't even muster up a fraction of the excitement that previous entries had. Unsurprisingly, this abysmal approach led to abysmal viewership numbers, with each episode feeling like the creator, Leslie Headland, had written the series to amuse herself rather than making any attempt to appeal to the established audience. Many fans quickly recognised that The Acolyte felt less like a genuine Star Wars series and more like a vanity project where Leslie Headland shoehorned her own life experience into an established universe. And, of course, this theory was promptly validated when Headland herself openly admitted in multiple interviews that she had, in fact, created the show this way. Unsurprisingly, it ended up lacking the spirit and essence of the beloved films from the 70s and 80s. It's no wonder then that The Acolyte secured its place as one of the most disastrous flops in Star Wars history. I suppose this is what you get when you're more concerned with pushing your own agenda and indulging yourself, rather than bothering with anything as trivial as quality storytelling. Given that disasters like The Acolyte exist, it's hardly surprising that Ubisoft and modern Star Wars are the ultimate match made in hell. So naturally, Star Wars Outlaws ended up being the perfect cocktail of everything wrong with both. The game was hyped as the first open-world Star Wars experience, and you'd think that with a franchise this legendary, they might have actually put in a bit of effort. But, of course, instead we're handed yet another bland, uninspired mess that barely justifies its existence. And as if anyone needed more warning signs, criticism about the game started rolling in long before its release, with the most of the early attention being garnered from the game's snooze fest of a protagonist. Kay Vess, the star character from the title, has regularly had her design called out by gamers as an example of the uglification of women in gaming. A commonly held belief amongst some is that there is an agenda within game development to desexualize all female characters in gaming. A subtopic I have recently learned more about, but we will discuss more on why this appears to be happening shortly. As for the criticism of Kay Vess's design specifically, the internet had a field day when they discovered that Humbly Gonzalez, the real-life actress behind Kay Vess, is infinitely more attractive looking than the in-game character she played. I mean, it's almost a talent show how Ubisoft managed to take a genuinely gorgeous actress and somehow churn out the most painfully average, forgettable protagonist imaginable. It's as if they went out their way to strip Kay Vess of any trace of sex appeal just to make sure she was as bland as humanly possible. While some believe the uglification of women in gaming doesn't exist and it's just a conspiracy theory based on pattern recognition, I have some information to share with you later that suggests otherwise. Stay tuned for that. At the very least though, we should praise Ubisoft for their consistency. They managed to design a character as bland as the rest of their game. On the 9th of April 2024, the predictably bad trailer for Star Wars Outlaws finally dropped, with it expectedly being met with tens of thousands of dislikes and a flood of scathing comments. This certainly didn't look like the Star Wars game that the majority of Star Wars fans were looking for. People were justifiably disappointed. Sometimes in circumstances where creatives get things wrong, like with the creation of Ugly Sonic for example, in rare cases the corporations actually listen to the potential audience. However, rather than attempting to address the overwhelming backlash, the game's lead writer Nikki Foy decided the best course of action was to lock down her X account, shielding herself from any criticism from having worked on the poorly produced title. Meanwhile, as fans and gamers were tearing apart the characters, the game's associate art director Marta Jonkers, in a truly heroic display of delusion, would step up to defend Kay's design, but would do so by issuing the most laughable excuse imaginable. Mart would comment, We put a lot of care into her design and what she's wearing and how she looks to tell her story. She has a lot of elements in her design that tell a bit of her story. For example, she has a broken nose. She's been through a lot. You can see that she has scars and stuff. Oh, brilliant! Because apparently it only takes a couple of scars and a broken nose to build a strong female protagonist. Truly groundbreaking work, Mart. Truly. Later in July, Ubisoft would collaborate with the equally dreadful IGN to share 10 minutes of Outlaws gameplay with the world. At the time of writing this, the YouTube video has hilariously received 85% dislikes, receiving 78,000 downvotes and only 13,000 likes. The comment section is filled with players burying the game and making their intentions clear that they will not be buying it. From this point on, people began gleefully tearing apart the game's numerous graphical and AI issues on social media, highlighting just how buggy and broken the entire mess was. But despite all of this, Ubisoft stubbornly refused to delay the game. The negativity surrounding the game was so overwhelming that during a routine earnings call, even one of Ubisoft's investors couldn't resist questioning the train wreck. They dared to ask CEO Yves Guillemot if there were any plans to delay the game and actually fix the countless issues. But in true Ubisoft fashion, the CEO responded with, "The game has gone gold, so the date is well confirmed for the 13th of August. The Outer Touch leader executive would also add, "We have factored in a strong launch for Star Wars Outlaws that reflects the fact that it is among the most awaited games of the industry this year and has a really strong positive community sentiment. And also the fact that we are coming with the biggest marketing campaign ever so far for a Ubisoft game." All I can say is, if there really is a strong positive community sentiment, I'm struggling to find it. Moving closer to the release of the game, the title would continue to be scrutinised and ridiculed by online observers, repeatedly pointing out more bugs and glitches and the protagonist's cripplingly bland design. While publicly the CEO was choosing to actively ignore all of this, the game's creative director Julian Geraghty would appear to be more thin-skinned, eventually clapping back at gamers. Speaking to the Washington Post in an ironic twist, would opt to step up and tell the world that gamers are not worth listening to. He would defiantly defend the character's design, stating that Kay is meant to be approachable, a petty thief who ends up barreling through this story, making bad decisions and centered with a lot of humor, humility and toughness. That's what's important to me. And she's beautiful, come on. After all, nothing says a traditional beauty on a woman like scars and a broken nose. He would vehemently disagree with the gaming public's opinion regarding the design, complaining that it makes no sense to me and it's not worth engaging with. If you engage with bad faith people, there's no nuance and no possibility of real dialogue, so all we can do is make the best game possible. Julian's statements are the perfect example of yet another Ubisoft mouthpiece who can't handle valid criticism and instead hides behind his own inflated sense of self-importance. And they seriously wonder why we're not buying their games anymore. His desperate attempt to cling to his so-called ideal version of Kate reeks of someone who refuses to acknowledge any perspective outside his own. Dismissing anyone who doesn't align with his vision as bad faith people is nothing more than classic gaslighting. Instead of considering that others might have thoughtful critiques about character design and storytelling, he'd rather pretend any disagreement is driven by malice. The way he smugly insists that Kay is approachable while hyping up her toughness and beauty comes across as nothing more than a checklist exercise that is so typical of these creatively bankrupt people. The very idea that toughness and femininity can't coexist unless they're wrapped up in battle scars and a busted nose shows just how two-dimensional this lot's thinking can be. It's painfully obvious he's pushing a shallow cookie-cutter idea of what a heroine should be, all while using fancy words to avoid any real discussion about dull, to some extent ugly design choices. This is exactly the kind of mentality that makes Ubisoft a joke. And trust me, there is plenty more where that came from. It seems the moment Ubisoft realised they couldn't squeeze an ounce of genuine excitement from the gaming community, they predictably resorted to their favourite tactic: throwing money around. Instead of addressing any actual issues or delivering a quality product, they opted to pay influencers to, well, influence. There's nothing unusual about this, as I've also been paid to advertise specific games on occasion. After all, if a company wants a bespoke video that highlights the positives of their game, it's reasonable to expect a fee for that service. Creating paid promotions takes considerable time and effort, and these videos often receive fewer views than regular content, since audiences tend to prefer organic content over advertisements. Therefore, charging a fee for the time invested and access to an established platform seems fairly reasonable to me. Ubisoft's approach to Star Wars Outlaws wasn't just different, it was downright shameless. Instead of the usual route of paying influencers for some straightforward dedicated content, this dubious company took it to a whole new level of desperation. They didn't just pay them, they plucked them from their homes, flew them to California, and then proceeded to shower them with VIP trips to Disney World. Oh, and just to really seal the deal, they threw in a whale-watching experience for some, because why not go the extra mile when you're practically begging for good publicity? Let's be real here. This isn't marketing, it's borderline bribery. By pulling out all these stops, they're not just buying influencers' time, they're attempting to buy their loyalty, manipulating them both financially and emotionally. It's quite honestly pathetic and Russian oligarch level shit, and nothing screams "we have faith in our game" like bribing influencers with a little sunshine and Mickey Mouse. God, I hate this company. The reality is that none of this was about giving shameless influencers a good time, it was about manufacturing positivity. They weren't content to let the game speak for itself. Oh no, Ubisoft needed to grease the wheels, make sure those promoting it were thoroughly pampered, and then send them back out to sing Ubisoft's praises. After all, why bother making a game worth playing when you can just buy the goodwill instead? This serves as just another prime example of Ubisoft's tendency to rely on manipulation and shallow PR stunts rather than delivering genuine quality to the gamers who, quite frankly, deserve so much better. Out of those, Ubisoft would attempt to buy favour from the YouTuber known as Star Wars Theory, who would confirm their interactions on his channel, stating, "At the end of the day, yeah, they did reach out. We were potentially going to do something. I gave them," his fee he means, "an exorbitant amount of money. I was like, well, you need to give me this, and look, there's going to be a ton of things in the contract that will not bind me to any sort of tailoring of what I need to or don't need to say about this game. If it's complete arse, I'm going to be totally candid about that." And so at the end of the day, nothing was signed. Nothing was done. And I'm happy about that, because the game looks like absolute shit. It looks like garbage. It's good to hear at least some of the Star Wars influencers are honest. He later confirms, yeah, we were in talks. They did reach out, surprisingly. I was like, oh, okay. I spoke to my network, and that he was a middleman, and that was it. I made him know for sure. I'm like, look, I ain't gonna play nice man. Like, if it's, you know, a certain way, I'm going to tell you how I feel about it. They know how I am anyways. In the end, I didn't sign anything, I didn't conform, I did nothing. No matter what the compensations were, it's my way or it's not when it comes to my channel. I'll never take a certain amount of money and then sign a contract which says I can say or can't say something. Like, screw that dude, I don't need that. Based. While Ubisoft was more than happy to splash the cash on whisking YouTubers away to Disneyland, come August 2024 they couldn't quite keep up the facade, as reports rolled in about them laying off around 45 employees. Just goes to show that despite all the glitzy influencer trips, this company nearly isn't as generous as they'd like everyone to believe. But hey, why bother treating your staff decently when you can spend the money on buying superficial goodwill from YouTubers instead? Speaking to Bloomberg, a Ubisoft spokesperson stated that a difficult yet necessary decision was made to align the studio's organizations with their future business and development objectives, leading many to speculate if this was a decision that was made to help brace for the, by this point, almost inevitable failure of Star Wars Outlaws. On the 30th of August 2024, Star Wars Outlaws finally limped its way onto the market, greeted by an underwhelming and utterly forgettable reception, with reviewers generously slapping a 7 out of 10 on it, a score that's become a running joke in gaming circles. IGN would ignorantly be one of the publications to give it this score, as it's the classic case of game journalist math, where a 7 out of 10 means mediocre at best, yet somehow gets masqueraded as a good score. It's laughably transparent at this point. What should be a blatant 5 on a proper 1 to 10 scale gets puffed up by critics desperate to stay in the good graces of game publishers. This constant pandering and refusal to call out genuinely subpar games is why so many have lost faith in these so-called professional reviews and are increasingly relying on independent content creators for their opinions instead. So largely these days, what game journalists think deservedly doesn't have the impact it once had in the past anyway. So, how did the game begin to perform sales-wise? As sales figures began to trickle in, it would be reported that in my country, the United Kingdom, Star Wars Outlaws sales figures were 55% lower than Star Wars Jedi Survivor, further illustrating the lack of interest in this game and the missteps that had been made with it. Soon became apparent that sales were less than expected for this game across the board. Building on issues surrounding the newly released game, some bugs would reportedly be so bad they would stop players from progressing in the game. This led to emails being circulated from the people behind the game that would advise players to start an entirely new game with a brand new save to prevent the problem. On top of the numerous bugs and the uninspiring character design that can be found in the game, gamers would criticise the title for its stealth elements being considered too basic and not very challenging, with the title feeling monotonous and lacking variety. The game neither looks like the Star Wars everyone knows and loves, nor does it play like games people actually like either. In addition to the countless bugs and the utterly bland character design, it seems that gamers dared to expect more from this title's so-called stealth elements, which turned out to be as simplistic as they come. Every aspect of the game feels like a repetitive chore, with about as much excitement as watching paint dry. It's almost impressive how they managed to create something that neither captures the iconic look of Star Wars nor delivers a gameplay that anyone with any shred of taste would find remotely enjoyable. If Ubisoft has perfected one skill in recent years, it's the uncanny ability to churn out the most uninspired, unappealing creations imaginable. If there wasn't already enough negativity surrounding this corporate disaster, rest assured that some of the game's staff couldn't resist chiming in with even more tone-deaf takes, along with a generous helping of tasteless jabs at both gamers and the Star Wars community. After all, the game isn't the problem here, right? The journalist said it's a 7 out of 10, so clearly you must be the issue. In an interview with CGMagOnline.com, Outlaws lead scriptwriter Nikki Foy and Humberly Gonzalez, who portrayed Kay Vess, jumped at the chance to spread their misguided opinions across the internet. The interviewer Dana Eileen would ask Foy the following question. So, our nerdy fandoms, especially things like Star Wars, present very male-dominated, whether that's the creative team or the fans. What's it like to lead the charge on this, both as the creative team and as the voice and the body of Star Wars Outlaws? To lead this male-dominated universe and have it be women first right now? Before even moving forward, I have to interject that this question is idiotic, as Star Wars has never been entirely male-dominated because it has consistently featured strong female characters and maintained a sizable female fan base from the very beginning. Princess Leia, introduced in 1977, was a pioneering figure who embodied leadership and strength, standing on equal footing with male characters and founding member of the Rebel Alliance. Mon Mothma is also a woman. Strong females have never been absent from Star Wars. But who cares about the facts when you can insert in some spicy identity politics, hey? Rather than acknowledge what I just acknowledged, Foy claimed that she loved Princess Leia but wanted to be Han Solo, which is fair considering how cool that character is, but here's where things get stupid. She goes on to tell a tale regarding constructing a lightsaber at the Star Wars attraction known as Galaxy's Edge. She states while there, "I just cried very hard the whole time, because it was like this brand meant so much to me and I didn't have someone like Kay to really see myself in. I loved Princess Leia, but I wanted to be Han, right? And I think getting to bring that to life is so special, and our whole team really, that's been the goal from the beginning. It's been really special." So, that's right, the bland, dreadful Kay Vess, who we are bored to tears by, is, according to the writer herself, a female version of Han Solo that she can see herself in. No wonder people hate this self-insertion character so much, as comparing her to such a legendary figure in Star Wars lore pretty much meant that Kay Vess was doomed to fail from the start. People love Han Solo largely because of Harrison Ford's unparalleled charisma and good looks, which brought the character to life in an unforgettable way. Ford's effortless charm, roguish smile, and confident swagger made Han instantly captivating, turning what could have been a typical rogue into a deeply magnetic presence. Tell me how this ugly design of a woman with a broken nose has any chance of resonating with fans in the same way. The very idea is ridiculous, if not completely delusional. Actress Humberly Gonzalez would give an even more perplexing answer, though in the process lambasting the entire video game industry, stating that it tends to have a lot of limitations and misogyny and kind of in and out politics of who can be a part of it and who you want to play as. These words are utterly ridiculous. Humberly Gonzalez's statement reeks of someone who hasn't spent much time actually engaging with modern gaming. The video game industry is one of the most diverse and inclusive entertainment sectors out there today, with a wide range of protagonists, female, male, non-binary, and everything in between across countless genres. In fact, it's so diverse that it doesn't actually reflect the rest of the world and the people who play it, which is one of the reasons why so many people see diversity in gaming as a shallow corporate box-ticking exercise rather than an attempt to improve the game's quality. But why let facts get in the way of a good virtue signal, am I right? If anything, the only limitations here seem to be in her understanding of the gaming world. This embarrassingly corporate mouthpiece then uses this as an opportunity to score minority points, even though her race was never part of the question that was asked, adding, "Representation is incredible for me as an immigrant Latina in Canada to bring, to even get to speak about my country, about Venezuela. Even in Star Wars, you know, there aren't a lot of Latinas in this space. And so, for me, I knew that this was going to mean a lot, not just to me and my community and my family, but to everybody else who's watching it too and playing it. I despise statements like this. I think that these people are so weird and self-absorbed to be so obsessed with their race and personal identity. No one asked for this information. It says so much more about her for bringing this up in the first place, as it wasn't even relevant to the question and suggests she has some kind of chip on her shoulder to want to bring it up. At the end of the day, representation doesn't matter. What does this mean anyway? Being the same race as someone doesn't mean that they represent you, nor that you represent them. It's egomaniacal and shallow to think that way. What truly matters are individual merit, skills, and character rather than demographic characteristics. No child should ever be taught to look up to someone more than someone else purely on the basis of sharing a few ethnic characteristics. It's bullshit. It honestly disgusts me that the likes of Hollywood and the entertainment industry as a whole place so much emphasis on skin colour. It sickens me. If representation truly mattered, then shouldn't I, in theory, be looking up to people such as Rishi Sunak and Kamala Harris because they are powerful people of influence in the West? After all, they carry South Asian heritage like me. By this actress's logic, I should be able to take a personal sense of pride from their achievements and feel represented by them. But the truth is, I feel exactly the same about them as the politicians who are black, Caucasian, whatever. Race is such a trivial thing to be obsessed about, and quite frankly, I find this really weird how it's the first thing these people always bring up. True representation should be about finding inspiration from those whose actions, principles and successes resonate on a deeper level, regardless of their cultural background. Race shouldn't come into the equation. Regarding the rest of her answer, especially referencing her claim that there are no Latino people in Star Wars, well, Star Wars is packed to the brim with actresses and actors who identify as Latino, making me question whether she has ever seen Star Wars in the first place. Oscar Isaac, who played Poe Dameron, is of Guatemalan and Cuban descent. Pedro Pascal, the Mandalorian, is of Chilean descent, and Diego Luna, who portrayed Cassian Andor, is of Mexican descent. If we are talking women, the now legendary Gina Carano, who played Cara Dune, is of Mexican descent, and Adria Arjona, who plays Bix Kayleen in Andor, is of Guatemalan and Puerto Rican descent. The list goes on and on, showcasing she didn't know what she was talking about and was, as is usual with these sorts of people, moral grandstanding for the sake of it. Neither Star Wars nor gaming is short of contributors from Central and South America. Seriously, I wish people understood the products they were working on before running their mouths about representation. Clearly, none of this was enough to help Ubisoft, as by early December, the company's stock price dropped by 7%. This would come in the wake of Outlaws reportedly only receiving soft sales. That Parkplace.com would report that this would lead to investors AJ Investments sending an open letter to Ubisoft's board of directors, encouraging them to go private or sell to a strategic investor. After detailing how they believe the company should be valued, the firm posited that blame should be placed on the current management. Ubisoft at current state is mismanaged, and shareholders are hostages of Guillermo family members and Tencent who take advantage of them. Management is focused on pleasing investors with beating quarterly results and not focusing on long-term strategy to provide exceptional experience for the gamers. The letter asserts, "We believe that the Guillermo family and Tencent are discounting potential value of Ubisoft in order to buy more shares at lower valuation and eventually take full control of the company at heavily discounted valuation. We value the great work that has been done by the Guillermos over the decades in Ubisoft, but now is the time to move on and restart the business with a new shareholder approach and new management/CEO. The investment firm threatened, "We will use the French minority law to collect enough shareholders to start proxy fight and initiate a sale process of Ubisoft to increase shareholder value for all shareholders." What an absolute show! Shortly after all of this, several financial analysts downgraded Ubisoft stock, blaming Star Wars Outlaws for the disaster, stating it had underperformed and not reached expectations. True Trophies would report that despite the huge amount of money thrown at Outlaws, by the end of the game's first month, it would not rank any higher than 39th on the PlayStation Network charts, further highlighting what a colossal waste of money this project was. By the 25th of September, a document providing new financial targets for Ubisoft would illustrate that they would drastically cut net booking projects for the next financial year. They would cut bookings by 30% after reflecting on the release and lack of release of Star Wars Outlaws and Assassin's Creed Shadows, the other game in this tale I might cover later this week. At least, though, they would finally admit somewhat the game is a broken mess that needs fixing by writing, In response to player feedback, Ubisoft's development teams are currently fully mobilized to swiftly implement a series of updates to polish and improve the player experience in order to engage a large audience during the holiday season to position Star Wars Outlaws as a strong long-term performer. With things going from bad to worse, a French game union known as Syndicat des Travailleurs de Jeux Vidéo would call for staff strike at Ubisoft as a result of the company demanding staff spend more time at the company's offices. It was believed these structural changes were quickly pushed through as a result of the embarrassing and financially woeful Outlaws disaster. The union challenged this, stating, "This decision was announced immediately after the failure of the profit-sharing negotiations. Exactly like previous salary negotiations, management's proposals were unacceptable. The negotiations timetable was appalling, and management was deaf to the proposals of the various employee representatives. A formal agreement on remote work, with a due process of real negotiation between management and unions, should have taken place. Not an arbitrary decision taken several months in advance, one which guarantees that each person can freely choose its number of remote days and when they are in the week, as well as being counted by the month and not by the week. The union's demands would include an immediate increase in all salaries to compensate for the drop in living standards in recent years, and for employees' opinions to be considered by the implementation of a social dialogue worthy of the name. The union would claim that Ubisoft management seems to confuse monologue with dialogue. As you can probably tell from all of this, Ubisoft doesn't seem like a great place to work at the moment, with the awful failure of Star Wars Outlaws forming just one chapter regarding what's going wrong at the company. With the drama continuing to unfold, YouTuber The Legendary Drops has recently uploaded a video titled, "I talked to Ubisoft devs. It's far worse than we thought," with the content documenting a number of internal problems at the company from the perspective of Ubisoft's own employees. One element I found particularly interesting about this upload was that it provides a decent answer regarding why female characters, including Kay Vess, are so incredibly bland looking. Essentially as bland as Ubisoft games. During the #MeToo movement, Ubisoft faced significant scrutiny and controversy over allegations of sexual harassment, misconduct, and a toxic workplace culture. In mid-2020, numerous reports emerged accusing several high-ranking Ubisoft executives and employees of harassment, discrimination, and abuse of power spanning over many years. A wave of allegations began surfacing on social media and through investigative journalism, with many former and current employees speaking out. This prompted Ubisoft to launch internal investigations. In response, several top executives resigned or were fired. Reports highlighted that a culture of sexism, misogyny, and abuse was pervasive at Ubisoft, with allegations pointing to a long-standing pattern of misconduct that was often ignored or tolerated by management. Ubisoft CEO Yves Guillemot acknowledged the company's failings and promised comprehensive changes to improve workplace culture, including overhauling HR processes, hiring new executives to lead efforts on diversity and inclusion, and implementing mandatory anti-harassment training for all employees. It appears that, according to current Ubisoft employees, the pervasive fear of facing disciplinary actions from HR has effectively paralysed the creative process, leading to an avoidance of designing female characters who might be interpreted as sexualised. This trepidation has given rise to the proliferation of bland, so-called safe characters such as Kay Vess, whose unremarkable appearance, including her broken nose, fails to resonate with audiences. Thus, our only recourse in this lamentable situation is to continue expressing our discontent loudly and withholding our financial support from such games until the company amends its regrettable practices. The question is that, if Kay Vess was attractive like all of the good video game heroines of the past were, would Star Wars Outlaws have been a more successful game? Well, probably not, considering a bad game is a bad game. However, making her better looking certainly wouldn't have done any harm, and as a result, Ubisoft would have drawn a hell of a lot less negative attention to an already negatively received game. Don't forget, you can get huge discounts on thousands of AAA, indie, modern and retro titles simply by using my affiliate link via the pinned comment. Or if you want to support what I do in a more personal way, gain access to my cosplay library and more by backing my independent voice over on Patreon. I'll see you all again soon.